5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Tanakwe. I'm pleased to be speaking at the third reading of the Subantarctic Islands Marine Reserves Bill, but I think we need a bit of a lesson in history here. One of the former National speakers, the former Minister of Fisheries, was almost claiming that National was responsible for marine conservation and legislation in New Zealand because it had passed the initial legislation in 1971. But the honesty around the history is the fact that that member and other National speakers need to acknowledge that the substantive work to establish these marine reserves was actually done under the former Labour government, because it was in 2006 that the Department of Conservation produced this background resource document, and it described the immense conservation and scientific values of the land and sea communities of the Subantarctic Islands. And it was this that recognised the strong international interest in better protecting the marine environment in the Subantarctic. And so it was also an initiative of the former government, not the national government, which established the Subantarctic Marine Protection Forum in 2008 to actually go and investigate and consult on the options for marine protection around the islands. So National is reaping the reward of this work, but it cannot claim all of the credit for it. And in relation to the work of the Subantarctic Forum, this bill is very much a missed opportunity because it implements the option for protection which was recommended by commercial fishers, not the option which was recommended by Ngāi Tahu, by environmental organisations like Eco and Forest and Bird, by the NIWA representative and by the scientific representatives on the forum. So they were recommending that there be full protection of the territorial sea around Bounty Islands and around Campbell Island. And that would have been world-leading if National had done that in developing the bill, and if it had listened to the submitters to Select Committee, which supported that full extent of the territorial sea being protected. So what we have is a much truncated couple of reserves coming through this bill. Nearly a third of the territorial sea around the Bounty Islands will be outside the marine reserve, and that's so that a longline fishery for ling can continue, a fishery that results in about $500,000 a year of revenue. So it's hardly a valuable fishery. And it should have included the full extent of the territorial sea because the Bounty Islands have got hundreds and thousands of seabirds using the landmass and using the seas around the island. We've got the biggest colony in the world, a breeding colony of New Zealand fur seals. So if we had had a decent reserve there, it would have gone right out to the extent of the territorial sea. And that's critical, Mr Speaker, because on the bounties, you've got very little vegetation on the island, very little soil, and the seabirds and the other species depend absolutely on the oceans. Yet we've failed to recognise the full extent of that interdependence by failing to protect the full extent of the territorial sea. It's also a missed opportunity because around Campbell Island, 61% of the territorial sea is going to be open to fishing, subject to a prohibition on Danish seining, and it's not going to be part of the marine reserve. One of the good things that the Select Committee did was to ensure that there was a review of that and the potential for a deepwater crab fishery within 3 years of the bill going into law rather than 5 years as was proposed in the bill as introduced. But the far greater worth of an intact ecosystem would have been much better recognised if we had had a proper full marine reserve here. And the Greens obviously would support that 100% protection, but we do support this bill because something is always better than nothing. And as the United Nations Environmental Programme described the islands as the most diverse and extensive of all of the Subantarctic archipelago, so this bill with some protection is definitely better than nothing. But the fact that we're establishing it under special legislation, that Parliament's time is being taken to pass it, again shows the fact that National has failed to introduce the Marine Reserves Bill that they have long promised. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call Louise Upston.
I'm proud to support the bill.
Members, this debate has concluded. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Subantarctic Islands Marine Reserves Bill, third reading.
Call on Government Order of the Day number 3.
Victim